Now, we in the United States don't understand that. Most Americans don't understand how much power and influence over all of this the CIA has, or MI6, or the Mossad. If you go into the Middle East, you see the same thing happening today in Syria with this corridor that reaches from Israel along Syria, where the Druze live, up to where the Kurds live, and then ultimately to Azerbaijan. This long corridor is designed to sustain the flow in oil, of gas, and potentially other things, commodities into Israel, but it's also there to split Iran from Russia and to strangle Iran to the extent that they can, better yet, to balkanize it by breaking it up, hence the interest in Azerbaijan's potential invasion of northwestern Iran. So we have the same playbook, if you will, that we saw fail miserably against Russia in Ukraine being implemented now. Now, there are a lot of variables in this one, far more complex than what they tried to do in Ukraine, because you're dealing with the ISIS remnants that now constitute a new Syrian jihadist regime. You still have the Alawites up in the corner who are being helped and assisted by the Russians to survive. And then you have the Israelis that are continuing to encroach. They want to control the watershed that comes out of the Mount Hebron. They want to control southern Lebanon. And you think of yourself as a heavyweight champion, but your championship is 30 years old. You're not young and vigorous, and you're not bulging with muscles, but you think you are. How do you think this is going to turn out? It's like going in and fighting Mike Tyson, and it's amateur hour on the Western side. We don't know what we're doing. Rationality would dictate a whole different approach, and this is why people voted for Trump. Because Trump recognized, first of all, we can't spend out of control. We have to deal with spending, and he said those things. Now, nobody wants to cut anything. We know that. But inevitably, you've got to do it. One of those things we've got to cut is our investments in defense, which have been, in many respects, bad investments. Investments in the wrong force. It's been the wrong force now for at least 35 years. And in addition to the wrong force, bad policies have produced less effective troops, less effective formations. We need to go after the healthcare system. For a fraction of what we invest, people in Europe receive remarkably good health care. I'm not saying it's perfect, and there's still private insurance, and lots of people invest in it, I know, in Germany and Austria, but you still have a pretty good basic health care system. And here, it's expensive to the point of absurdity. So we've got to deal with that. And then over the horizon sits this thing called Turkey, which is in serious economic trouble. We all know that. And is led by probably someone who is even more adroit in marketing himself than Trump. And he's on every side of every problem. He's sustaining Israel with oil and gas and food, and at the same time, he's condemning Israel and pretending to be a leader of Islam. But he's in such bad economic shape, he's afraid if he does anything, he'll fall apart. Same thing is true for Sisi over in Egypt. The question is, when do these economic matters not matter? When does this become an emotional moment where people say, the hell with this, we have to fight? I don't know, but I think it's coming. And then in the background, you also have Iran, who's part of the Belt and Road, the One Belt, One Road initiative. And that's not going away. That's wildly successful. Contrary to what President Trump says, BRICS is wildly successful. More and more people want to join it because they want to get out from under the debt bomb. The debt bomb is what they've lived under from us. That's what the IMF, the World Bank, the SWIFT system, everything's designed to pass our debt to them. And in that, we talk about a debt trap. We're in the business of creating debt traps everywhere we go. The dollar has almost become a virus. That's why de-dollarization is well underway. We're broke. The military is overstretched, worn out, and we have no answers except to double down and continue to do what we've already been doing. So that's really why I wrote the piece. It's called Versailles on the Potomac. And it's always problematic whenever you look for historical parallels, Glenn, because nothing's perfect. But it's starting to shape up in ways that are too reminiscent of what's happened in the past. Of course, the problem that we face in addition to all of this is that we are now a balkanized, bastardized, Bolshevized population. We're no longer dealing with a homogenous population. When we went into the Depression, we had many problems, but as a population, it was largely homogenous. We were able to pull together. We were able to pull together for the Second World War. That homogeneity persisted into the 60s and then began declining, and now it's almost completely gone. So we have no idea how many millions upon millions of people are in this country that came from overseas, from other places, largely from what we used to call the developing world. And anybody who brings that up and says this is dangerous and problematic, you're a racist, you're a bigot. But in reality, it's a very serious problem. But there were opportunities to do things differently. But the point is now it's a done deal. It's a fact. It's not something that you go to war over. Everybody accepts that. But apparently everybody doesn't all of a sudden. And you see, this gets back to the position the Russians are in. Today you say one thing, tomorrow you say another. What do we believe? When do we know what you are saying is real? So I think at this point, Moscow doesn't believe much of anything that any of us say. What they've decided to do is be prepared for the worst. The United States of America, at great cost to the Treasury that was already effectively bankrupt. Now France really is bankrupt. And every attempt by the one lone rational voice, Necker, to come to some sort of arrangement with a budget that made any sense has been defeated. And you've got an unhappy population out there that's living in what is arguably the richest country in the world at the time, France, with the highest standard of living, and they're miserable. And then in the midst of all of this, which makes even less sense, we see new nuclear weapons arriving in Great Britain. And these weapons are designed to be launched by F-15s or F-35s. We call them tactical nuclear weapons, ideally suited to attack targets beyond the Baltic littoral in northern Russia or potentially via Ukraine. And we announced this, and we're talking about these things. It looks like there is a universal agreement in Washington right now that the way to do business with Russia is to continue to bully and threaten. Now, you would think this, how many years are we into this war now? This has been going on since February of 2022. How has all the bullying and threatening worked out? It hasn't. It's been a catastrophe. It's made everything worse. So why are we continuing to do this? The next question is, who is really governing the United States? That's what people don't seem to know. You're talking about 1%. The 1% with billions that control trillions. And this 1% is driving us to war in the Middle East. It's driving us to war with Russia. And this 1% consists in some cases of ideologues. These ideologues go back to the 60s. Susan Sontag was a good example, who said the white race in America is a cancer that needs to be cut out. Then you have George Soros that says the world will be better, especially Europe, when it's flooded with Africans and Arabs. You've got to go to the margins when you perform surgery. You have to look at the area around it, the organs that are adjacent to the location of the tumor. They have to be dealt with. You have to systematically examine them. And if there's evidence for cancer, they too must be subjected to surgery and removal. We in NATO and the United States, we're good because we're a liberal democracy. That's a joke. Our democracy is a fraud. That's one of the things I talked about in the Versailles on the Potomac. The ballot box is broken. You can't vote your way out of anything anymore. No matter who you vote for, you get the same disastrous outcome. So obviously democracy has failed miserably. And then if you're an authoritarian, you're bad because all the liberal Democrats are good. That's absurd. Because if you look at the authoritarianism, at least in Russia, and I would argue in several other places, these societies are very solid. Russian society is cohesive. Russia is a success. Putin isn't in danger of being overthrown. He's not this weak dictator that lives in a state of permanent paranoia. This is all nonsense. So what it boils down to, if you're a Russian, is as follows. And Americans don't understand this. You can't get to a negotiated settlement with the United States, Ukraine, its puppet, and NATO, unless you understand three things. Number one, what exists in Kiev is a cancer. It's a tumor on the body of Russia. This cancerous tumor must be removed. And that's what President Putin and his armed forces have been doing for the last 3.5, 4 years. They're removing the tumor. However, just cutting the tumor itself away is not enough. The less polite term that we would use in Philadelphia, where I grew up, is he's a pimp. And he's made a lot of money, and he's also being backed because what he offered as a procurer or as a pimp was blackmail. So in addition to bullying people, you could also blackmail people. I think a lot of people are in the Epstein files. Yeah, I think it cuts across party lines. It has a lot to do with how much money you had. And he was pitching the oldest and most attractive product out there, and it worked. And at some point, this is going to come out. And my comment in Versailles on the Potomac was one of the key things that led to the revolution and the head chopping that followed was a conclusion by the French people that the people governing them should not be governing them, that they were unworthy of it, that they were decayed, degenerate. They were not just oppressive, they were morally bankrupt. And Louis XVI was the last in line because people gave him the benefit of the doubt. Now, as it turns out, Louis XVI wasn't all that bad. He actually was a very good man. He was just feckless, didn't know what he was doing. In this case, Louis XVI looks like everybody else. And I think that's the big disappointment as we go forward, especially for those that voted for President Trump to discover that this man really isn't different from the people we voted against. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We cannot spend indefinitely. And then you have, depending upon whom you want to talk to, at least 50 million illegals, and they're enjoying free health care. What is this problem? Who thought this up? Everyone shows up who's done nothing, paid nothing, and suddenly they get everything for nothing. What about the average American worker that's paid into these systems for years? People are beginning to figure out they've been taken to the cleaners. If you're an American, you get third place in whatever's up for discussion. And oh, by the way, whatever happened to militarizing the border to really get control of the drugs and human trafficking, because that continues. Oh, the optics are better. You don't have tens of thousands of going across. But unfortunately for us, through most of the legal ports of entry, got enormous corruption there. And the drug cartels have billions of dollars in cash to pay people off. And so the drug and human trafficking continues headed north. And then you have truckloads of cash headed south. This is incredible what goes on. So we haven't fixed these things. But optics are everything right now for politicians. It's what looks good must be good. The average American is gullible, but he's not that gullible anymore, and he's beginning to ask harder questions. So I don't see any of this ending easily or well. The question is, I don't know what triggers the end of this long phase of jockeying for position in the shadows, and we go to all-out war, or we go to all-out economic financial collapse. I don't know which one. That's why that's where you end up. These entities are about permanent conflict that is designed to enhance and strengthen the West. The problem is it doesn't work, and it hasn't done that. Things are not improving around the world for us. We're continuing to rotate 100,000 men into and out of Eastern Europe along the border. We still maintain all these installations, and as recently, the new commander, Donahue, this General Donahue, who was an architect of the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, he naturally was rewarded, promoted, and now he's talking about attacking East Prussia, which is called Kaliningrad. And East Prussia has been in Russian hands now since the end of the Second World War. And I think it would be a very serious mistake at this stage to engage the Russians over the place. But he's talking about it, saying that we could overrun it and control it in 24, 48, 72 hours. There's nothing the Russians could do it. And at the same time, we have President Trump saying, I've changed my mind again. No more 50-day drop dead time. It's now moved to 10 or 12. It doesn't make any difference because we know what's going to happen. And it's very sad, but they're going to have to pay a terrible price. And that's going to happen. And there are these implications in various conversations. People are saying it in Washington, and I think it's being said around President Trump, that we could actually engage the Russians ourselves with long-range strike weapons. In other words, you could see tomahawks in the air on their way to Moscow or Leningrad or something else. My point is, you can't get that in a settlement with the United States that ends up with a U.S./British puppet in charge in Kiev, even if it's a rump Ukrainian state. Can't be done. Secondly, you can't have a state where the CIA, MI6, and Mossad are effectively controlling everything, which is the case today in Ukraine. That means that President Trump faces the unenviable task of crossing the Dnieper River, of going into Kiev, eventually down into Odessa. And I think that's what they're preparing to do. But before they go, they are going to systematically annihilate whatever remains of Ukrainian military power east of the Dnieper River. And that's what's going on. These cauldrons contain the last remnants. In other words, instead of a lightning offensive, this operation is more like a vacuum cleaner. In other words, you're using the vacuum cleaner at various points to clean up and eliminate the opposition. And remember, the purpose of this special military operation was also always root out and destroy the Ukrainian military that is there because of its association with the regime. That's almost over. That's going to happen very soon. And then they have to do what I said, because if you don't do it, whatever agreement you come to, you will see a resumption of cancer. You still have underlying assumptions on the Western side that are false. Assumption number one, Russia's weak. And the longer this war lasts, the weaker it gets. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Russia is stronger now than it's ever been. Its military power is greater than it's been certainly since the early 1980s. So Russia is not at all suffering in the sense that we would like to believe they are. And Putin, again, is not this feckless dictator living in a state of paranoia. But these are the things that you hear in the mainstream media. That's why if we just keep this up a little longer, if we just continue to push, Russia will collapse. Russia will fall apart. No, it won't. On the other hand, we stand an excellent chance of falling apart for a whole range of reasons that I've been discussing here. So the question is, what comes first? I just don't know. But the bad news is in the West, people continue to believe the nonsense. Now, somebody said, we'll fire 100 Tomahawks, and that'll be a game changer for the Ukrainians. There's almost no army left. The few people that are left are, as you pointed out, being rounded up and destroyed in these cauldrons. I don't see anything good happening inside Ukraine with regard to men on the ground with weapons of any kind. So if you look at the fragility of our economy, and the underlying fundamentals are not good, and something does go wrong on a scale of 2008, which everybody's predicting, Jamie Dimon has come out and said he's looking for a major crisis in the very near future that could be infinitely worse than the 1929 Depression. Those are pretty grim words coming from Jamie Dimon. He's not exactly somebody who screams fire in the theater. If he's saying those things, everybody should be very worried. And he's not the only one by any means. My point is, we're headed down a very dangerous road, but it's like everything else. For many people, until it happens, nobody believes. And on the military side, to listen to someone like this General Donahue make these incautious remarks about attacking the Russian enclave in Kaliningrad is lunacy. But he's aligned with Trump. Everyone's in the business of threatening and bullying. I don't see him having any success. And by the way, his influence over the conduct of Ukrainian operations was nothing if not disastrous, because we've gone back and looked at that. It looks as though the worse you do, the further you get. While the tumor may go, within months, within years, the cancer will return because you haven't done a thorough surgery. The only way to do that is to cross that river.